excited to have David Icke back on Skype right now. Since we posted the Conspiracy Crimes of the Illuminati podcast 3 months ago, it's got over 500,000 views. People are loving it. People are asking to get David back on. He's been so generous with his time. A lot has happened in this past 3 months. David's new book is out, The Trigger, about 9/11. It's this long, and I read it over the summer. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It's got everything in there about 9/11, plus so much more. Draws on a lot of his previous work, but has a lot of new information in it as well. So I highly recommend The Trigger to people out there, and the link to that is in the description box below this video. Then we had the Epstein news blow up with his suicide, and I know the story's been hammered to death, but David from the very get-go has said this was a pure intelligence agency operation involving the CIA and the Mossad. So I'm wondering, David, how you drew that conclusion.
Well, first of all, excuse the lights. My lighting system, Sean, is very sophisticated. It's called the window. And at the moment, as we speak, the sun's coming straight through it, and it will be going across in a second, and we'll be fine. And I just want to make the point, as we have the sun pouring in, that the sun is absolutely nothing to do with the temperature of the earth. I want to make that clear, because all the experts have said so, even though it's the source of heat, which I feel the last time I looked affected temperature. No, it's not the sun. It's a gas of life called carbon dioxide, without which we'd all be dead. So I just want to make that clear, that people should believe everything they're told about climate change caused by human activity.
You look like you're transforming into your true angelic form, the illuminated one.
Clearly the sun has nothing to do with it. But we're nearly gone, and we'll get into it. The thing about what I've done is I've done it for so long, 30 years now, and so when you do it full time, day after day, and I pretty much work 7 days a week, not because I'm a martyr, but because I want to. And to a large extent you have to, because you're trying to uncover something that doesn't want to be uncovered, and therefore, as you know yourself, there's a vast spectrum of interconnected events, people, organizations, networks that are there to be uncovered, and you don't do that in 5 minutes. So over the years, going way back to the 1990s, it's become clear, very clear, that there are paedophile operations, goes into Satanism as well, but there are paedophile operations and networks around the world that are actually run by the intelligence agencies. The three major ones in terms of that, in my experience, there will be others, are British intelligence, the CIA and American intelligence, and Mossad and the whole intelligence network in Israel. Why do they do that? Well, one key reason is compromising people they need to support their agenda. See, when people say, you're saying there's this big global conspiracy, yeah, so loads of people must be in on it then, in terms of driving it and knowing all about it. But that's not the case, of course, because if there were independent people, that's the key word, that were in on it and were the kind of personality that would be horrified by it, then it would come out. It would have come out a long time ago, and of course it has come out, but not in the public arena on anything like the scale that it exists. And so you have basically two groups of people in the, or maybe I could go into three, but two that relate to the paedophile operation. One is the group that absolutely knows what's going on, and knows what it's all about, knows the direction the world's being taken. Now they're, by not only by definition but by necessity, the smallest group, because the more that know what's happening, the more chance there is of that seeping out. And then you have the next group. This is the group that involves people in politics, other areas as well, but particularly politics, who are in positions of power that have the yay or nay on whether decisions are being made in terms of the direction of a country and the direction of human society. Now, a great chunk of that group are not in on it. So they have to be brought in on it in a way that, although they will be, perhaps some of them, horrified, they will still go along with it because of the consequences for them. And they're the people that you compromise. You compromise them either because they have certain, if you like, desires and you provide them, or you just set them up. Either way, you have something on them that if it comes out, it's over. And then you've got the third group very quickly, which are the people that every day are making decisions and taking actions that push the world in the desired agenda direction, who have no idea there is an agenda or anything else is happening except they're doing what they're told to do. So over the years, it's become clear that, for instance, Mossad has had a massive influence and input into this paedophile ring, along with the others. But Mossad comes up again and again. And what that means is that if you can, from a network operating out of Israel, compromise politicians in different countries, then you don't have to always compromise them through paedophilia, of course. You can compromise them through, out of marriage affairs. You could, honey traps as they're called. You could do it by trapping them financially, whatever. But you entrap them. And then they make decisions, not that they would have made in and of themselves, by themselves, but decisions that they now make, otherwise what they've been compromised for doing will come out. And this is a massive operation. And when you see people, Sean, you'll see a politician who maybe be speaking in favor of something or speaking against something, and then suddenly they just change direction. And they suddenly start speaking for what they were against and speaking against what they were for. And one of the reasons, there can be others of course, but one of the reasons this about turn happens is because they've been compromised. So now they do what they're told or else. And we've had two classic paedophile ring operations that have come to light in recent years. One is Jimmy Savile in Britain, the BBC entertainer who was exposed for this record-breaking paedophilia, but what's not come out is that he was providing children for the rich and famous, and thus they watched his back, the system watched his back. This is why the police knew, we know that, the police knew. If the police knew, then special branch, the elite level of the police knew. If they knew, British intelligence knew. And yet Jimmy Savile ended up being an inner circle bosom buddy of the British royal family from the 1960s, virtually to his death, in terms of Prince Charles to his death. And he was introduced into the royal family in the 1960s by Lord Mountbatten. And of course, I've been saying for years and years and years in the books that Mountbatten was a paedophile, and now very recently there's been a book come out which has been quoting documents from the FBI, which are also talking about the fact that Lord Mountbatten was an alleged paedophile. More than alleged, he was. And so we reach the point where we've gone from, this is not just an historic level paedophile, this is a procurer of children for the rich and famous, and now we take the next leap, because a lot of people don't know, most people don't know, that Jimmy Savile was very close to Israel. He had a flat in the heart of the Jewish community in Leeds, for instance. He raised a lot of money for Jewish causes. He bragged about how he was talking with the leadership in Israel. He bragged about how he told them that they'd been too soft on the Palestinians and other Arab countries after the Six-Day War. And he described himself as the most Jewish Roman Catholic. Now that, for a start, absolutely sends alarm bells off for me, because in The Trigger, indeed my previous book, but in relation to 9/11 in The Trigger, I tell the story of a death cult which has got the name over the years of Sabbatean Frankism, and we will get into that maybe later, but in brief, it's a death cult that infiltrates communities and infiltrates religions by posing as those religions, by posing as those communities. So they infiltrated the Islamic world and became the Saudi royal family, and became the Wahhabism extreme hand-chopping expression of Islam. They became Israel by creating the state of Israel, while posing as outwardly as being leaders of the Jewish community. They created Christian Zionism in America, etc. And what they do is they infiltrate by posing as. And what you get is a series of people who appeared to be born Jewish, for instance, who then convert to another faith. You look at Karl Marx. Karl Marx basically did that, and Karl Marx's family. And Karl Marx was a front man for this Sabbatean Frankism. Then you see so many people who've taken this conversion. Adam Weishaupt, the guy who is credited with creating the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776 with the Rothschilds, and Jacob Frank, who was a major player, a serious major player in this Sabbatean Frankism. The second part of it was named after him. And they created this Illuminati. Now, Adam Frank was a Jewish guy who converted. And you have Rothschilds. The Rothschilds are not Jewish. They're Sabbatean Frankists. They're interlopers. And then you have Adam Weishaupt, who was given the credit for creating the Illuminati. He was born Jewish, but brought up as a Roman Catholic. He was educated by the Jesuits, for instance. So you whenever you see this conversion, it's worth having a look at, because this is the way this death cult works. And so if you are looking at this network, this technique of creating paedophile rings and compromising people you need to have in your control so they'll make the decisions you need them to make, then you start to look at the whole Jimmy Savile operation on another level beyond what it's been looked at up to this point. Because once you are compromised by a paedophile ring, well, apart from being 100% honest and saying, look, I did this, I shouldn't have done it, but I'm coming out because I want to tell you what's going on in terms of what's trying to be done to me. But how many people are going to do that? Virtually nobody. So you got them. So if we move then across the Atlantic, we see a mirror, basically, of the Savile operation. in the form of Jeffrey Epstein. He was providing girls, minors, for the rich and famous, and some of them who very bravely and very tenaciously pursued him to try to get justice. They've talked about the fact that on his island and other properties, there were hidden cameras and microphones. So it's very clear what he was doing, compromising people. Indeed, he's alleged to have, by some of these former minors at the time, to have spoken about it. And then you look at Ghislaine Maxwell, his so-called madam. She's the daughter of Bob Maxwell, who was a Mossad agent. We've had Mossad agents write books saying this, and it's come out in other ways too. He was fronting up for Mossad when he was owning the Daily Mirror in Britain, when he was a famous British businessman known as the Bouncing Check, you'll remember. Because one thing about Maxwell is, you know, the old saying, when his lips were moving, he was lying. You could see that because one was cause and effect of the other. And so in the end, as his business empire started to unravel and he became a potential bad news for Mossad, according to this agent that wrote books about this, they killed him on his boat, ironically or maybe appropriately called the Lady Ghislaine. So what we're looking at is two tips of the iceberg, if you like, of something that's going on all around the world, where people are being compromised to make decisions they wouldn't normally make and to accept things happening in their countries or their sphere of influence they wouldn't normally allow because they're being compromised in this way.
Yeah, I've got a few things to say on that then. There's a lot to absorb there. So I have recently interviewed John Mark Dugan, who was an ex-Florida cop who the lead detective on the investigation into Epstein the first time was named Rick Curry. He died mysteriously around just over age 50. He was a completely healthy guy. He died mysteriously. He didn't trust the Florida Police Department with the evidence, so he handed a bunch of these files, including video evidence, over to John Mark Dugan. John Mark Dugan right now is in Russia. He has denounced his US citizenship. They're calling him up saying you need to come into the embassy and submit your passport, and he's absolutely not going to do it. Now, people are saying, okay, it's all well and good that John Mark Dugan is claiming that he's got these files from Recurry. So a guy I've worked with for years, Ron Chesyupiuk, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who writes about Escobar and the Colombian cocaine cartels. He was in Russia, so he went and met with John, who's got the files, and there's thousands of files, and they watched a tiny little fraction of the videotape evidence, and they had to turn it off because they saw orgies at Epstein's place with what looked like underage girls and faces they were starting to recognize. They only watched a minuscule fraction of what are on these files, so that corroborates what you said. That evidence is out there, and John has said that the FBI has copies of all this because they raided his house and took all of his copies as well.
Well, see, this is how it kind of works, this death cult. It infiltrates, and outwardly it appears to be what it has infiltrated. And it's infiltrated the FBI, it's infiltrated the CIA, it's infiltrated the Pentagon. All these came together for 9/11, of course. It's infiltrated the administration of the American government. It's infiltrated the authorities and the government networks in Britain, in France, in Germany. It's all over the place. And therefore, through these compartmentalized pyramid groupings, like the FBI is a compartmentalized pyramid, the CIA is a compartmentalized pyramid. And in the trigger, I quote a number of FBI agents who were complaining that they were stopped from investigating aspects of 9/11 before it happened, as well as after. And they were, just to show how this compartmentalization works, they were bemused at why the hierarchy of the FBI, for instance, would stop them investigating something that clearly needed investigating. But this is how it works through compartmentalization. So you've got the situation with the Kennedy assassination, and the district attorney, Jim Garrison, who was the only person to bring anyone to court for the Kennedy assassination, a guy called Clay Shaw, and the case didn't finish as it should because of the amazing kind of constant theme of people dying who were on the list of potential witnesses. So the usual thing. I remember watching a video it was about Jim Garrison, and because the movie JFK was all about that, but this was the real Jim Garrison talking about the real events that he experienced. And one of the things he said was he couldn't understand. He knew it was true, but he couldn't understand how it was done. He said the Dallas Police Department and the federal government and this organization and this organization and the FBI and this organization were obviously working on this together, but he couldn't understand how they could have coordinated it all. Well, when you get into this and these secret society networks, then you see how it can be coordinated. And this is what's happening all the time. This is why you will have a situation with Epstein where, first of all, he is outed, and the networks that he was working for, then also not only working for in terms of this paedophile ring, but working for in being a conduit to fund high-tech companies and high technology, which is all part of this whole smart grid that's unfolding. These things all connect because it's the same group doing it. So the networks, to protect their man, arranged for this plea deal, which basically got him no prison time for something that should have been a long prison sentence. And then you had the situation where it wouldn't go away, and it reached the point just before he died or disappeared, whichever idea people want to believe in, that it was clear that the dike was starting to break. And so the same networks that protected him then arranged that he would not end up in court where anything could come out. You also see the situation where the FBI raid his island only after he basically died. What? Why aren't you on that island after case number 1, the plea deal? No, because these secret society networks, in the end, this death cult, protects its own. This is how Savile got away with it all those years when the police knew and all these other people knew. It's because that which he was serving looked after him. And whether Epstein died, was murdered in the prison cell, or whether he was in some way spirited out and it was all covered up, as some people believe, one thing's for sure, the sequence of events that led to him disappearing were so blatantly set up, it's unbelievable. Taking back suicide watch when it's alleged that he'd tried to commit suicide shortly before, removing the prisoner that was with him, which was, of course, a block against suicide, so he was on his own. These security guards that should have been looking at him every half an hour fell asleep, so we're told, and the cameras in the corridor that could have seen if anyone came out in and out the cell in the relevant period, they are kind of somehow not working properly, and therefore there's no footage, so we're told. Well, see the Pentagon on 9/11, for instance. So it's a constant theme, and because of another part of this agenda, which is mass surveillance, which they want because they want to keep surveillance 24/7 on the population, it also means they have a problem when they're carrying out their own operations in public places where these cameras are. So what happens again, and again, whether it's terrorist attacks in Britain, whether it's 9/11, whether it's the Oklahoma bombing, whether it's the Brazilian electrician who was shot 7 times in the head by British police, whenever these things happen, the cameras aren't working. 17 traffic cameras between the Ritz Hotel and the Pont d'Alma Tunnel at the time that Diana died, Princess Diana died. All 17 weren't working, we're told, when that car made its final journey. So, I mean, these are constantly recurring themes, and more people are getting wise to them, but not enough.
So you've talked about the US authorities and the FBI and what went down in the MCC. Let's just come back to this side of the pond. So the first investigation came about into Epstein, and the detective in charge of that in London shut it down. There were allegations made against Prince Andrew, and they shut it down. So when it resurrects this second time, the heat is on in the media. Prince Andrew goes to Spain with Fergie, hoping it will blow over. It doesn't blow over. Prince Andrew goes to Australia, even further away, hoping it's going to blow over. It doesn't blow over. But then he hires a new PR guy, a Mr. Stein, or Stein, I don't know how it's pronounced. This is Andrew's new PR guy now. And all of a sudden in the news is this massive story about Carl Beach getting, I think it was 18 years for making false allegations about elite paedophilic activity and child sex abuse. Now, I don't know if it was in one of your videos, I saw in someone's video, but apparently a politician, I think it was McAlpine, he wrote a book, and in his book he said that when there are mass claims of abuse against you, create a false abuser, blow it up in the news, and all the other victims will lose credibility. So what are your thoughts on Prince Andrew, Carl Beach, and this new PR guy that Andrew has hired?
Well, Prince Andrew can hire all the PR people he likes, and they can be very efficient in manipulating the information that comes out, what people will print and what they won't. But what these PR people can't do now is persuade the great majority of the British public, indeed the wider world public, that Prince Andrew is anything but guilty as hell of being involved with this professional paedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous, Jeffrey Epstein. The evidence is absolutely already, what's in the public arena is overwhelming. Now, what lies outside the public arena with people that you've mentioned who have some of the footage, who knows? But for sure, we already have enough information, not least through the evidence of this lady Roberts, who has told the story of what happened with her and Prince Andrew in London and other places, I think, as well. And so they can try to cover it up as much as they like, but they'll never convince the vast majority of people that there's an innocent man here in terms of not knowing about Epstein. When you are visiting Epstein, visiting his house in New York, when you are walking down the street with him in Central Park, after it's come out what he's been doing, and then you say you didn't know. Well, I mean, please, don't insult our intelligence, mate. So what they can do, however, is control the system so that although great numbers of people go, "You knew nothing, Andrew. Yeah, sure, mate. Yeah, of course. Yeah. What a load of tosh." But they can stop the person actually being prosecuted, despite people seeing it for what it is. And that's what's been happening. I mean, for the British police to announce that they're going to take no action against Andrew in terms of bringing him in for questioning and getting him to answer very relevant questions that have not been answered is just so blatant. If he wasn't Prince Andrew and he was anyone else who wasn't, having his back protected, then he would have been down the police station with a long list of questions to answer a long, long time ago. So again, because you have this network operating from the shadows, that operates to a completely different set of laws and consequences to the general population, and that's why again and again you see preferential treatment for the rich and famous that the general population would not enjoy. It's because there are these two worlds literally interacting. And in terms of Coal Beach, well, for me, that was the most blatant diversion, exactly as McAlpine talked about. Of course, I called McAlpine out as a paedophile in a book called The Biggest Secret in the 1990s. And when it eventually came to the surface and there were allegations about him, even though he wasn't actually named, many years later, he was taking all and sundry to court. He got a massive payout from the BBC, who didn't actually name him. He got a massive payout from ITV, who didn't actually name him. He got he took the speaker's wife to court, and this George Monbiot guy, who they tell me is a journalist, I always laugh when they tell me that, on The Guardian, and others. And at the same time, I was saying again, the guy's a paedophile. But he never came for me. And he never came for me in the 1990s either, when I was also naming Ted Heath, who didn't come for me when he was still in Parliament. Because Heath was having children provided by Jimmy Savile, their big connection. So McAlpine was absolutely part of this and understood, therefore, the techniques of suppressing it. And what you were just describing there, Sean, that he said, was that if it gets to the point where it's serious, then basically you create not just a diversion, but you create a situation which discredits or seeks to discredit the whole thing. And we've seen exactly that. I was first told about the Westminster paedophile ring operating in the Thatcher administration, including people like Leon Britton and Lord McAlpine and others, back in the 1990s. That's why the end of the 1990s, 97, 98, I published that in the book, The Biggest Secret, because I had enough information to cross my line to say I'm going with this. And I was told about Heath in the 1990s to the point where it crossed my line. And then later, of course, it all starts to come out. Leon Britton was under investigation at one point. This is after the Savile's death, when there was this big outcry of paedophiles in the elite paedophile rings. There was Leon Britton. He was investigated by the police. You had the McAlpine story and so on. You have the Heath story, investigation by Wiltshire police. And then, while this is kicking off, and oh, by the way, while this is going on, you had the government, through the then Home Secretary, later Prime Minister Theresa May, being forced, kicking and screaming, to have a inquiry into elite paedophilia and paedophilia in institutional paedophilia. And of course, she named as Home Secretary two heads of that inquiry that were so absolutely compromised in terms of connections to the people they were supposed to be investigating. One of them was Leon Brittan, Home Secretary and other jobs in the Thatcher administration in the 1980s, and suddenly, whoa! The media reacted and said these people are not appropriate. What they call survivors, people who had been abused as children, said these are not appropriate. So what did that do? It threw the ball, kicked the can down the road, because the idea was to put as much time between these massive revelations coming out after Savile, who was, by the way, a bosom buddy of Margaret Thatcher, whose cabinet members of whose cabinet and government that was coming out, and therefore people start to forget about it. In fact, Margaret Thatcher had a technique she talked about called toughing it out. If you were in trouble politically, then you just refused to budge and refused to budge and refused to do anything to accept responsibility, and then eventually the headlines will change and people will forget about it. That was the idea of pushing this inquiry can down the road, and eventually it has another head, Baroness J, I think her name is, and it's ongoing. And so at the same time that this was unfolding, you then had the Coal Beach story. A guy who came out anonymously to start with, and named a series of people who have been named to me, including Leon Brittan and Ted Heath, but also he named people that have never been named to me. And this is one of the great techniques. I call it gin and tonic with a twist. What you do is you name people who are guilty and you name people who are not guilty. And when the not guilty are exposed not to be guilty, what you're doing is discrediting allegations against all of them, the guilty and the not guilty. And this is what has happened clearly with the Coal Beach case, because now we have, using only the Coal Beach example, the Westminster paedophile ring has been shown to be a fantasy, a conspiracy theory that wasn't true. No, it wasn't. It's absolutely true, and it's still going on now. But you can see how they've done it, exactly the techniques that McAlpine talked about, and it's been very effective. But some of us are not going to let it go away.
So, watching your videos on YouTube and reading your books now, going back decades, and I urge everybody to go and read David's books, especially The Trigger, and go and subscribe to his YouTube channel. All the links are in the description box below this video. Just absorbing your work over the years, there are some very important lessons I learned when it comes to scrutinizing what's really going on in the world. Your biggest one is the problem, reaction, solution. But another one that you've taught me over the years is when a situation happens, such as the death of Epstein, the culprits will often show themselves in the cover-up of the investigation. And we've got this guy, Barr now, William Barr. He is heading the investigation into Epstein's death. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know enough of the background to Barr to make any definitive comment at the moment, but I can talk in the wider way that it works. So often, of course, the people that come out and condemn most loudly and vehemently and either demand an investigation or instigate one are people that want to shut it down. See, it's about getting control. Everything is about control. If you, you look at the people that were named to run the paedophile investigation in Britain. It wasn't just about trying to knock it down the road, though that was certainly the outcome of it. It was also about control. And it comes down to a simple situation that, say you want to build a highway, a motorway, or a freeway, and you know it's going to be very, very controversial because vast numbers of people don't want it built. All you do is you have a public inquiry into whether it should go ahead or not, and you just make sure that the head and the people running that inquiry are going to decide that it should go ahead from day one before any evidence has been given. If you want a court case to go your way, this is why not every judge has to be compromised, not every judge has to be in on it, but you appoint the judge that you know is going to give you the result you want to oversee the case where you need the result to go your way. And so many people set up inquiries. We'll see with Barr, but you set up inquiries because then you control them. You control the outcome. I mean, this is a classic. When the grotesque mind control torture operation called MK Ultra came out publicly, the story broke, had to eventually because it was so immense, so massive. You had Nelson Rockefeller appointed to oversee the inquiry. And you had Gerald Ford setting it up, and Gerald Ford was involved in MK Ultra. So what you did with MK Ultra, because you controlled the investigation, is that you let some stuff come out because it weren't credible not to, but the true massive scale of it and what you were really doing and people involved in it didn't come out. And that's what happened, as you know, reading the trigger, with 9/11. The whole investigation was controlled by the same forces that carried it out. And therefore, the truth never came out officially at all, not least through the 9/11 Commission that was controlled by the force that was involved in making 9/11 happen. So it's always very, very wise when people come out, we must have an inquiry, we must investigate this. Just as Theresa May did, actually, when the whole thing broke in this country when she was Home Secretary. You need to be very vigilant and ask who benefits. Who benefits by those who are running the inquiry, controlling the inquiry, and thus overwhelmingly controlling the outcome.
From your work now, I've transferred this to my parents, so whenever anything happens on the news, they're always saying, now, who benefits? Who benefits? On a smaller scale, when I was incarcerated in Arizona for the ecstasy trafficking, I applied for a clemency hearing, and my parents, they flew 5,000 miles to visit me in Arizona, and they were all scheduled for this clemency hearing, and I had a visit with them the day before. After the visit with my parents, I was walking back to my cell, and the prison counsellor stopped me, and he goes, "Hey, I've got the results of your clemency hearing here." I said, "What do you mean my clemency hearing's tomorrow?" And he goes, "What? How can that be?" And he gave me the results, and the results were that I was not accepted for clemency. So my parents were just going through the motions the next day, and it had already been pre-decided. But going back to
That's
Epstein...
That's exactly how it works, mate. I mean, it worked for you there. It works in these major national and international inquiries. I mean, mate, did anyone think that the Dutch inquiry into the downing of the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine was going to decide any other outcome than basically it's the Russians? No chance.
Going back to Epstein before we finish here then. Okay. So Epstein's dead. The legal liability that would have come about in the criminal case is over. Those names are protected to that extent. But if Maxwell gets arrested, if Jean-Luc Brunel gets arrested, that would reopen that liability for these elite, powerful people. Do you think Maxwell and Jean-Luc Brunel, they will be taken out next?
Well, that's one of the techniques they use, for sure. I mean, as her father's business empire, which was funded by Mossad, started to unravel, and all the revelations were waiting to come out, he became a liability. See, this is what we're dealing with, mate. We're dealing with psychopaths of the most extreme nature. And to these psychopaths, the end is all. The outcome is all. And everyone is someone that can be hung out to dry if they get in the way of the outcome, even though they may have worked to secure the outcome for a long time. Everyone's expendable in this network. It works as one unit, and different elements or what's happening to different elements threaten the whole, then that element will be cut out. So absolutely, that's what they do. But there's another question, which is why the hell they haven't been arrested already? What? You've got all these revelations about Ghislaine Maxwell and what she was doing for Epstein from all these different sources. You've got photographs, and they don't investigate her. They don't pull her in. Well, why haven't they pulled her in? For the same reason they haven't pulled Prince Andrew in. Because where would that lead? Imagine having Prince Andrew in court. What could come out? Prince Andrew, or can I call you Mr.? Or can't call you Mr.? You're a prince. So I have to call you Prince because you're better than me, because you've got a title and you're royal. I mean, do we still have a royal family in Britain and the Commonwealth in 2019? I mean, are we not reached adulthood yet? Apparently not. But imagine having him in a witness box, being cross-examined by a skilled barrister. I mean, the guy wouldn't know where his next word was coming from. So the potential of things coming out would be enormous. Same with Ghislaine Maxwell. So they don't want them in a witness box, and they either make things happen so they don't come in the witness box that we've talked about, or they just don't pursue them. The key is, are they going in the witness box in a public court to be cross-examined or not? Anything that stops that, we need to find a way of making that not happen. That's what they did with Epstein, of course. And had it come out about Savile before his death rather than afterwards, then something like that would have happened to him. Because everyone's expendable. But, all over this Epstein thing are classic techniques of this death cult, but also it's on public display. That simple question, why hasn't Ghislaine Maxwell been investigated? Why isn't she being questioned in this second wave of revelations about Maxwell and Epstein? Why hasn't Prince Andrew been questioned about the gathering evidence of his very fundamental connections to Epstein and the idea he didn't know what Epstein was doing? I mean, you're having a bloody laugh, mate. Your underlings might believe that, but some of us have got a bit more intelligence, thanks. And you've got the fact that all the things that happened with Epstein to stop him getting in the witness box, they're all classics. It's a modus operandi which just gets repeated again and again and again and again.
So I've read these things that Virginia Roberts has said in a statement about Andrew. She's detailed all of the sex, the foot licking, the toes, the orgy, the other underage girls that were there in the orgy. And, R. Kelly, he had all these allegations coming forward. And then there was a video released of him. I think he was peeing in an underage girl's mouth. And he went to trial over that case. And he beat it. He managed to have one of his workers was related to the girl. And that worker got up and testified and damaged her credibility and all this stuff. And he managed to beat it. Now, if John Mark Duggan over in Russia, if this vast video evidence has Prince Andrew at one of these sex parties or even having sex with Virginia, if that came out and that incontrovertible evidence existed, do you think there's a chance in hell that Andrew would ever go to prison for that?
Well, my instincts say no, of course, but, we shouldn't underestimate the way that increasing swathes of the population are getting more and more streetwise to this. And with that, I hope will come the attitude of, sorry, we're not having this. Because what we're seeing is a misrepresentation of the public mood, the public perception. Because we have what I call the microphone people, and we have the people that never get near microphones, the general population. And so what we see on the television, the shrill voices in all directions, are the microphone people. And they are the woke people. They are the Extinction Rebellion people. They are the Green New Deal people. They're the people demonizing this country or that country, calling for vast transformations of human society on the basis of packs of lies, depending on what subject they're talking about. It's usually a pack of lies no matter what the subject. And you can get an impression, Sean, that that's the public mood. It ain't. You take climate change. You've got so many people, all the microphone voices. Oh yeah, we're all gonna die. Yeah, must change the world. Stop driving. Don't fly. Oh, you and your private jet, you're all right. But you, on your package holiday, you're killing the planet, right? But get away from the microphones, and a very different attitude, a very different perception exists. That's what caught them out with Brexit. They thought the microphone people in metropolitan London had their finger on the pulse of the nation. And they found they didn't, and they were shocked. Do you mean the whole country doesn't feel like we do? No, thank God. There are some intelligent people here. So it's getting more difficult for them. It's getting easier in one area of the population because they'll believe anything. I mean, to believe that, carbon dioxide is going to destroy the world when it's the gas of life, it is just, if you can make people believe that, you can make them believe anything. But it's a good example of this, because vast swathes of the population don't believe that, think it's a load of bloody nonsense. So we shouldn't judge the public mood by the mood of the microphone shrill voices, because they're not the same. And people stop me in the street all the time talking about what's going on, and it is very encouraging to listen to people in a supermarket aisle or something, giving you an opinion about a situation that is extremely perceptive of what is actually happening, as opposed to what they're told is happening. I don't think it's going to be as easy to get away with what they're doing among the general public in the way that they have up to this point, because I'm old enough to remember when what we call television news was a BBC guy walking up to a government minister and saying, coming off a plane from some overseas visit or something, and saying, "Minister, what would you like to say to the nation?" They were doing that. But now, and people were kind of, establishment and all that stuff, but people are not as cap-touching as they were before, and they're getting much more streetwise about how these things work and where the world's being taken. It's incredibly encouraging for me when I see people. They just call. I love it. They call them ordinary people. There's not an ordinary person on planet Earth. Just extraordinary people who are told they're ordinary. But among this so-called ordinary people are where the people are that have really started to get it. The shrill voices, the extinction rebellions, and all that stuff. That's where they bought the lie, hook, line, and the other thing, and are promoting an agenda which is driven by the very people they think they're opposing. Whereas the general population is getting much more streetwise about all this, and it's very encouraging.
I'd like to give a huge shout out to those extraordinary people to read The Trigger. After I read The Trigger, I immediately left a 5-star review on Amazon. David is banned from various countries around the world. His work is shadow banned on various platforms. He's demonetized. If you're out there and you want to support David, you can buy The Trigger. You can leave a review. The review feeds the Amazon algorithm, and then it promotes the book to more people. This book is so big. It's this big. And, I would love to come down there and do a whole podcast on The Trigger review.
That'd be good. That'd be good, because it's 2 books. It's 2 books. It's first book, part of the book is demolishing the official story of 9/11, and the second half of the book tells the story leading up to who actually did it. And it's 2 books in between 2 covers.
Well, just in brief right now, David, why should people buy The Trigger?
Well, its title alone indicates why I wrote it, because 9/11 was the trigger that began a sequence of events that's still going on today. If you look at all the things that have happened since, in terms of regime change and upheavals, violent upheavals in countries, you look at the surveillance, the increasing destruction of privacy of any kind, the constant tracking getting more and more extreme, they all went into overdrive as a result of 9/11. And so it's not surprising, and this is what the book's all about as well. It's not just about 9/11, far from it. That's why you find that the people that are driving today the climate change hoax to justify the centralization of power over every area of our lives, that's driving the smart grid, technological control grid, and all these other things, pushing still wars in different parts of the world. That's the same group, the same death cult that was behind 9/11. And 9/11 was the event that pushed it on. It gave massive momentum to this agenda that it didn't have before. And so to understand who and why this death cult pulled off 9/11 and blamed it on 19 Arab hijackers is to understand who's controlling the world today and to what end.
So I'll put the links to both of our books in the description box below this video. Your work has inspired my work. I wrote American Made about the CIA cocaine pilot Barry Seal. I've got a new book coming out for Christmas. It was called We Are Being Lied to, The War on Drugs. But with everything that's going on, I've changed it now to the title is going to be Clinton, Bush and CIA Conspiracies from the Boys on the Tracks to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
So
yeah. How long is this Clinton death count going to our body count gonna get before either they leave this world or someone susses what's going on?
At the top of the cover, it's going to have hashtag Clinton body count.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I wrote a book, mate, which I wrote in 94. It came out in 95 called And the Truth Will Set You Free. And I was writing about the Clinton body count then. And look what's happened since.
It's absolutely endless.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Something my son has put together, and I think it's very important. On November the 5th, we're launching something called the Iconic Media Platform. And it's basically a way that we've got about 300 hours of material already. All the stuff that I've done over the years will be on it, but a hell of a lot of other stuff. In fact, I'm going on to the mainland from here, the Isle of Wight, tomorrow to record a 10 program series for it, and we've got documentaries and we've got so many really cutting edge people that are contributing to it, and it's launched on November the 5th. You can find details about it on davidicke.com. And the reason we've done it is because, you can't just sit around and wait for the Silicon Valley mafia, which is controlled by this same death cult. I go into all that in the trigger, with Israel's massive connection into it. You can't just sit around and wait for them to just totalitarian tiptoe censor more and more and more and more. We've got to create something which will allow this information, at the cutting edge of the information, to continue to be available. And that's the idea of the Iconic platform, where the only censorship is going to be, can you support what you're saying with facts? If you can, you're on.
So David also did a video that's going viral on the True Geordie podcast. True Geordie, great guys. They've got almost 2 million subscribers on YouTube. I'm going to put the link to that in the description box below this video. Are you all right to just say how your experience was with the True Geordie?
Yeah, it was a good laugh, and as well as being a great vehicle for getting across a lot of information. And you see, this is how it's changing, and in many ways that kind of relates to what I said a few minutes ago. We have gone, and this is what they're now trying to shut down. We've gone from Minister, what would you like to say to the nation? And everybody's sitting there, go, what's the minister going to say? To actually the population becoming its own journalism, becoming its own media, asking its own questions, doing its own thing. And that's why they're desperately trying to shut it down. So things like the Geordie podcast and yours and all these others that are going on are incredible. Funnily enough, my brother sent me a newspaper article today in the Leicester Mercury newspaper. And it was on their website, where I saw it. And it includes a picture of this group of mothers and little children, about, infant school, literally, in 1957, walking down this muddy track, which, later became a road sometime later. And the article was pointing out that the little boy with the school cap holding his mum's hand were me. And that was in 1957. And when I look at the world that I was born into, and the world I see today, it's almost a different planet. And it's a different planet in two ways, one good and other one not so good. The not so good is that the control system, which has always been there, but has now got much more technologically sophisticated with AI, and becomes a threat in the totality of human freedom. But on the other side, people are now, the streetwise people, the non-microphone people, are now much more aware of the world in terms of how it works, and they are much more or much less cap touching to the establishment and their perceived betters. When I was a kid, you were brought up to respect your betters, and I thought as a kid, well, I'm not having that. If people want my respect, then they'll earn it. They ain't getting it for free, no matter what they do, just because they're old or just because they've got a title. And more and more people are much less deferential, that's the word, to the system, much more questioning of it, and much more motivated to get up and do something for themselves. And hence you have all these people now who are broadcasting, and although they haven't been to journalism school, which would destroy them as journalists, actually, to be fair, I was a mainstream journalist for years, and you know, don't go that way, because you'll just live in a box where what you can say and reveal is so narrow. You might as well not bother. So the real journalism is coming from the people now, and the Geordie podcast is part of it, because they'll have people on and they'll ask them questions, and information is then imparted to the audience, and it's information that you will not get in the mainstream. And so the mainstream is desperately now trying to hold on to its audience. Why is it losing audience? Because this part of the population, the non-shrill voices on the microphone, is getting more and more streetwise about the media, and thus finding its information from other sources. And there's lots of bad things going on. There really are. And this thing moves on. But there's lots of really good things going on. And eventually, we'll get to a tipping point.
I got a message this morning from someone. They said, I used to watch Sky News in the morning for the news. Now I'm watching your Epstein clips instead of watching Stein News to get what's really going on. And I'd just like to say to all those people hounding me to get David back on the podcast, when I finish this recording, I'll discuss that with David and see if we can get a date on the calendar. And I'd just like to thank David for being so gracious with his time again. And like I said, all of his links are in the description box below this video. If you've got questions and comments, put them in the comments section below. Please click over to David's YouTube channel. Let's get him up to 1 million subs here soon. So take care out there. Cheers.
Thanks, mate.